Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and we are here with my 2024 reading recap. Just to give you a few stats before we jump into the individual books, this year I read 81 books in total and that added up to 30,234 pages. My shortest book that I read was 84 pages and my longest book that I read was 1392. My average book length was 373 pages. And my average rating was 3.8. So overall, a pretty good reading year. This was the year that I got into audiobooks, so there are quite a few books missing behind me because I listened to them instead of reading them, which has been good, and I definitely think I've read more books than I would have otherwise because I was listening to audiobooks. I don't want to make this intro too long because we have a lot of books to get through, so I've got my laptop with my Goodreads so that I make sure I don't miss any of the audiobooks. So if you see me looking down here, that's why. I've also been a little sick, so if my voice sounds rough, I'm sorry, but we're going to just jump right in. I've stacked these books in order of when I read them. I'm not going to link every single video that I have that's working through these, but I will link the playlist down below with my monthly reading wrap-ups if you want more detailed, and then I'll give some links of a few of the other book videos that I've done throughout the year if you want more detailed thoughts on these, but this is just going to be a pretty rapid-fire overview. Alright, starting off, the first book that I finished in 2024 was Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. Don't know if I'm saying that right. This one was a very interesting book. I gave it 3.5 stars. If you don't know, this is a Russian classic, and basically you're just following this guy, Dr. Zhivago, as he goes through his life. He's not the most likable character. A big plot point of this book is that he's cheating on his wife, and then he goes through like 3 different people, like women, through the book, so I don't know. It was a little weird. He wasn't the most likable character. This overall is not my favorite Russian classic, but it was good. I'm glad I read it. I always feel accomplished when I finish a classic book, and I was reading this because I wanted to have a little more context behind some of the music that I've been listening to from the musical, and I don't know that I necessarily got that because the musical doesn't seem to line up with the book super well, but that's Dr. Zhivago, my first book of the year. And then I started into my reading Nordic Noir video, and the first book that I read for that video was Faceless Killers by Henning Mankell. This is a Kurt Wallander book. It's the first one. I gave this book 3 stars. I thought it was alright. It was one of those books that is very much so basically a police procedural, just in book form, which isn't my favorite. I like something that's a little bit more thrillery, connect the dots type of a thing rather than what real police work looks like. This one, definitely you're following this whole lead up and then it takes a few month gap where they're just making no progress on the case, and then they get this random tip and it ends up being something totally from left field. It's not something where all of the pieces come together and make this really cool plot twist. That's not what this book is. So, I don't know, I was a little underwhelmed with the ending, but overall the book was fine. I don't plan on continuing reading any of the books in this series, but I thought it was alright. Then I took a break from filming that video for one book because it was a new release that I was super looking forward to, and that was The Fury by Alex Michaelides. If you don't know, this is the author of The Silent Patient and The Maidens, and I really enjoyed both of those books. This one was a little bit different from his other 2 books. The previous 2 books, the main character you are following is a therapist. In this case, you are following, is he like a screenwriter? I can't remember what his profession is, but he's in the theater world, and he is friends with this famous actress, and she invites him and a small group of people out to her island in Greece for like a weekend away, and then a murder happens while they're there, and he's kind of going back and telling you it, and it kind of, you have a very active narrator in this one, which is again a little bit different from his other books. I actually really enjoyed it. I've heard some people that didn't love how the narrator was done in this one, but I thought he was super fun. He very much so was talking to the audience. He's aware that you're reading the book type of a narrator, and he's really funny. It added a little bit of humor, and you're very much so jumping back and forth between what happened on the island and events leading up to it, but then you keep jumping back to the same events and you get a little bit more information every time you go back, and then it builds up this whole plot. Great twist. I thought it was fun, and it does link into his other 2 books in a very fun way. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. I will say there is a bit of strong language, so, and it's definitely more of an adult book. Then we went back to my Nordic Noir books with The Hummingbird by, It's been a while since I've looked up how to say this name, so hopefully I don't butcher it. But Katie Hicapelto, something like that. This one was okay. I gave it 3.5. I will say out of all the books I read in that video, this one was much more freaky, felt like true thriller of the bunch. But I didn't love one of the themes that it was trying to discuss in this book was racism. Her partner is very racist and she's a person of color, and so a big part of it is him just being super, super mean to her. There are a lot of racial slurs being used, and I don't know. I feel like I get having a character like that so you can make commentary, and by the end they kind of make peace a little bit. And I do think, is this a series? Yeah, I think this is a series, so I'm sure as the books go on it gets better, but it was just a little bit much for me in order to prove the point. And then I read The Bat by June Nesba. This one is, I believe, a Harry Hula, I think that's how you say it, novel. I did not like this book. I gave it a 2.75. The plot line was fine. But he was just one of those characters who just did terrible things just to try and make him like, oh, this gritty detective that is life's a mess. And it's just like, really? And there was just like a lot of unnecessary gross scenes, some weird spice in it that just had nothing to do with the plot and was just not needed. And the ending just was not that great. So did not enjoy this one, will not be continuing the series. And then the last book that I read for that video was The Legacy by Yrsa Sigurðardóttir. And this one was my favorite one from that video. I gave it 4.5 stars. I felt like it found a good balance between thriller, but also kind of Nordic noir, darker themes. I felt like it approached the other topics that it was trying to cover in a tasteful way, and it was a very interesting twist. I will say there was a few weird things. There is a bit of an incest plot, but it's very much so like, I don't know. I don't feel like it was done weird. It was very much so there was this thing that happened and that's why a lot of the bad stuff's happening. Like I don't know. It wasn't done in a way that felt so gross, but just as a heads up. That is a thing. I really liked the twist ending, and I do actually think I would like to read some of the other books in this series. I just haven't gotten around to them yet. And then after all of that Nordic noir thriller stuff, I wanted something a little bit happier to read next. And so I picked up Thorn Hedge by T. Kingfisher. This is my first book by this author. I'd seen this recommended by lots of people, one of which was Carrie Can Read, and they just described this as basically just feels like a classic fairy tale, and that is exactly what it is. I thought it was so good. It is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but I love how she twisted it. I think the main character is just so cute and wholesome, and it's just a book that I would recommend to everyone. It's super, super short, so anyone, I think if you wanted to get into reading, this would be a good place to start, and I gave this one 5 stars. It was one of my favorite books of the year. The next 3 books I'm going to talk about together because I read an entire trilogy back to back, and that is the Maze Runner trilogy. So we have The Maze Runner, Scorched Trials, The Death Cure, all by James Dashner. This one I filmed a whole reading vlog of going through these and reading The Maze Runner for the first time. I've been doing a bit of a series of reading really popular book series for the first time that I just have never read yet, and so this was part of that. As far as ratings for these books, I gave the first one 4 stars, the second one 4 stars, and then the third one 3.75. I really enjoyed the first one. I felt like the second one dragged a little bit, and then I just did not like the ending of the third book. That is not where I thought we were going with this, and it just felt really anticlimactic after everything we'd gone through. I feel like there could have been a better way to wrap the series up. I know that there are other books that are either after the events of this, or I don't know, maybe I think there's a couple prequel ones, but I just don't know that I've had the interest to read them. I also haven't watched the movies, so might do that at some point, but these were good. I get why they're so hyped up, but the ending kind of killed it for me. And then the next book that I read is one that my husband has been wanting me to read for so long, and that is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 1 in the Stormlight Archive, and these are some big books. I read this one in like a week, so it was really good. I gave it 4 stars. It's very much so a world building setup type of book. It's not like, I don't quite understand where we're going with the story still. I have not read the second book yet. just because they're so big. It is on my list to read in 2025, but this one was good. It feels like we're setting up for some really cool stuff. It just isn't quite happening yet. I had a bit of a hard time keeping track of the characters because there are a lot of them and you're jumping POVs a lot. I think it'll be easier. Some of the storylines kind of came together at the end of the book, so I think it'll be easier in the second one now that some of the characters aren't so separate. Overall, just a good book. I don't have a ton more to say. It's Brandon Sanderson. It lives up to the hype, but I am interested to see where the rest of the series goes. And then after that, we were on our way to Paris for a trip, and I decided to do a video of reading European authors while I was in Europe. And so the first one that I did for that was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This book I gave 3 stars. I thought it was just okay. I don't quite understand why people love this book so much. The main character is just annoying. I feel like it was just too long for what it was trying to do. I don't know. It was fine. It just wasn't my favorite classic ever, and I don't have a lot more thoughts other than that. And then while we were in Paris, I wanted to read a book by a French author, and so I ended up picking up A Winter's Promise by Christelle Debos. This one is a YA fantasy series. I believe it was originally fan fiction based off of something, but I'm not sure what. I loved this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was just so magical and such a great setup and a very interesting magic system. Very, very cool. Then on the plane ride home, I picked up The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. I did not like this book. I don't know if I would have gotten through it if I hadn't had a big plane ride to make a decent dent in it. I gave it 2.5 stars. It's basically everybody kind of refers to it as a Sherlock Holmes of the Benedictine monks. I just thought it was super boring. There were these really long sections where they'd just go off on religious debates, and it just wasn't interesting to me. So I ended up skimming a lot of it. It had a lot of really weird, granted probably historically accurate ways of viewing women, and the mystery part was just so small that it just did not save the book for me. I finished that video with Death with Interruptions by Jose Saramago, and this one saved the video for me. After the whole Umberto Eco thing, I was kind of slumping out, but I gave this one 4 stars. I really like his writing. It is very straightforward, just plain writing. It's not, I kind of expected it to be a little bit more flowery. He did win the Nobel Prize for Literature, so I definitely want to read more by him, but overall, great book, would recommend. And then we reach the first audiobook that I finished this year, and that was The Pelican Brief by John Grisham. This one me and my husband listened to together while we were driving up to Idaho to do house hunting, and I gave it 3.5 stars. I thought it was good. It's a legal thriller. I don't know if legal thrillers are really going to be something that I spend a lot of time reading. It was good, it was interesting, but it just didn't hook me in as much as I think it could have. Then I went back to the Mirror Visitor series. This is The Missing of Claire de Lune. This is the second one in the Winter's Promise. This one was just super fun, continuation. It's hard to talk about the second book in a series without spoiling things, but very much so court intrigue is where we focus on this one. Fun development with the characters. I really loved where we went with some of the things. And this one I gave 5 stars. This was my favorite book in the series. It was just so well done. And then the second audiobook that I finished in the year was The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This one I loved so much. It is a mystery thriller, but with fantasy mixed in. It's very magical. I just make sure you go into it thinking it's a mystery, not that it's a fantasy book. The world building, the magic does not get explained like a fantasy book would, but the mystery thriller part is really good. I loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. There were definitely some parts that were a little bit slow. There were some characters that I didn't love so much, but overall, really good book. Okay, I'm noticing how little we've gotten through, so I'm gonna pick up the pace a little bit as we go through these. But the next book that I read was Children of the Mind by Orson Scott Card. This is the 4th book in the Ender's Game series, and it finishes off the main series, and then there's a whole bunch of other ones in the Enderverse. I gave this one 4 stars. I didn't love it as much as the 2 that came before it, but it was still good. The series gets very philosophical afterwards, and I thought we reached a very good conclusion with the characters that we were following. it just felt like a good wrap-up book. And then I read A Curious Beginning by Diana Raybourn. This is book 1 in the Veronica Speedwell series. I gave it 3.75 stars. I thought it was good. It's kind of a historical mystery romance-y book. I don't really read romance. I was in it for the mystery, and I think that that was the downfall of it for me. It gets very lusty very quick, and that kind of brought it down for me. I did try to start the second book in the series, and I just gave up on it after a little bit because it just, the romancy, lusty thing was just too much for me. I was there for the mysteries, and if we just weren't getting along with the plot fast enough. After that, I went back and finished the last 2 books in the Mirror Visitor series, so The Memory of Babel and then The Storm of Echoes. Memory of Babel I gave 4.5 stars. I thought it was still good. You take a little bit of a turn where the main character goes off on her own a bit, and I just didn't love that because I loved her and her interactions with the side characters. And you just kind of lost a lot of them in that book, so that brought it down a little bit for me, but it was still really good. There were some interesting things happening. And then we got to the last book, Storm of Echoes, and I feel like the author just seemed a little done with the series maybe when the first like half of this book was good. And then it just hit a certain point where I just feel like nothing was really happening, or everything was happening too fast and we just weren't really diving into it. I gave it 3 stars. I did not like the ending of the series at all. There were some major character deaths right at the end that we just did not dive into. And then we end right back to basically the point that we were at the end of the second book. And it was just super weird. Like, we'd already done that plot line before, and I don't know. It just did not work for me. It was very open-ended, which I don't like those to begin with, so not my favorite ending. These feel like 2 totally separate books from the first 2. The first 2 are very court intrigue, fun, and then this becomes a whole separate thing. So I don't know. They were good. I would still recommend the series. Just mentally prepare yourself for not the best ending. Okay, and then while I was reading all of those, I was kind of working my way through this 90-day devotional book. It's called How to Put Love First. It's by Sadie Robertson Huff and her husband, Christian. It's very much so like a devotional book that you just do, like read a couple pages a day and then work through it. I thought this was good. I've read a few of her devotional books, and this is not my favorite of them. I don't know if it was just the place that I was at or what was going on with it, but I just didn't connect with this one is good. But I think it's a good book if you want something like this, but it's not my favorite of her devotionals. Okay, and then the next book that I read, I technically listened to this one as audiobook, but I have since bought the book of it. This is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. It is a Romeo and Juliet retelling set in 1920s Shanghai. I really liked this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was super well done. I loved the characters, and just overall a really good book. I thought it was really fun how she twisted the original story of Romeo and Juliet, and it was very atmospheric. After that, I listened to All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is the first book in the Murderbot series, or the Murderbot Diaries. It's a series of short stories, so they're really tiny. It was only about a 3-hour audiobook. I thought it was good. It was nothing super special. I gave it 3 stars. I think it's just hard to really do a lot with that short of a book, but she did a good job for what it was. It just is never gonna get rated super high compared to what it could be. I might read another of them at some point if I feel the urge, but I'm not like racing to finish the series. And then I read the last book in the Robert Langdon series by Dan Brown. This is Origin. These are a series of books that are religion versus science mystery thriller type books. I really appreciated that this one took a bit of a different take on that conversation. It is set in Spain. Overall, I really liked this one. This one is 4.5. I thought it was an interesting way to end the series because it just feels like another book. It doesn't feel like some big wrap up, but overall really loved it. I love this whole series. It was good. And then I listened to Our Violent Ends, the second book in that These Violent Delights series by Chloe Gong. I gave this one 4 stars. I don't know that I loved it as much as the first book, but it's still really good. I didn't mind the ending because I know there's other books that come after it. I think if there weren't other books, then I probably wouldn't have been thrilled about the ending, but it's really good. I'm planning on continuing the series this year, but this is technically a duology, and then there's another duology after it, so I'm interested to see where we go with it, but it does conclude the 2 books. Overall, I think it was great. Highly recommend. The audiobooks are good. And then the next several books that I did were, I basically just listened straight through the entire Sisters Grimm series. These are all middle grade books. They're written by Michael Buckley. I love it. This was all rereads for me. I did read them as a kid and they were some of my favorite books. There are 9 books total in this series. Again, they're all little short. I rated all of them right around 4 stars. Really the main ones that stand out to me, the 7th book and then 9th book, I gave 4.5 stars. Those were a little bit better in my opinion. They're kind of big culmination ones. Overall, I just really love the series. If you're looking for something to listen to with kids, if you're looking for something to recommend to kids, or if you just want something as an adult, I think that the plot is still super fun even as an adult. It's definitely still following a real plot. It just is written a little bit younger. So that's the Sisters Grimm's series. I adore it. It is very close to my heart and I would highly recommend. In the midst of listening to all of those books, I also listened with my husband to Close to Death by Anthony Horowitz. This is book 5 in the Hawthorne and Horowitz series. This one was not my favorite. I gave it 3 stars. I feel like the series is going downhill a little bit for me. This was the most recent release, like it had just come out. I've listened to all of them and they're all fun, but it just feels like we're dragging it out way too long. And I read somewhere online that he's planning on making this like a 12-book series or something, and I just don't think we need it to be that long. The character development is going so slow. Like, you don't know hardly anything about the Hawthorne detective character, and it's just like, okay, at some point we gotta actually get some information about this character. It just is way too slow as far as character development. The first 3 had kind of this like funny, humorous side to them and it was fun, but then it kind of went downhill after that. This one also, they were going back and doing like a previous case that the detective had solved. It wasn't a current one that they were going through, and I just don't think it worked as well. I appreciate that he was trying to switch it up, but I just don't think it needed to be. And then one more audiobook, The Secret of Chimneys by Agatha Christie. This is a superintendent battle book. Honestly, I don't think the Agatha Christie audiobooks are for me. I love her books, but I just really struggled to understand the narrator. I feel like he just had a really thick accent that was kind of hard for me to follow, and when you combine that with the old English writing style that she has, it was just really hard. To be honest, I don't remember a ton about this book and I could probably reread it. I gave it 4 stars. Agatha Christie books are always good. And then this next book, I listened to half of it and then I read the other half. This is Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians by Brandon Sanderson. This one is one of his middle grade series. It's just a fun kids book. I gave it 3.5 stars. I think it's good. If you want just like a quick breeze through, I think it's a really good book for kids. I don't know if this one is quite as fun as an adult as some kid books are, but obviously I'm not the intended audience at this point, so I don't know. It was good. Good palate cleanser type books. If I need another one like that, I will pick up the rest of the series. And then the next book that I read was Happenstance Found by P.W. Catanese. I'm not sure. But this is book 1 in the Books of Umber. This is also a middle grade fantasy series. This was a reread for me. I read these books as a kid, didn't remember a ton about them, honestly. I gave this one 3.5. I feel like it's a good setup book. It's really fun. There's some very unique characters in here that I really enjoy. Just overall a good start to a series. And then I listened to The Watchers by A.M. Shine. I was seeing ads for the movie, and it was such an interesting concept to me, but I'm not really a horror movie person, and so I decided to try and read the book because I feel like things just are never quite as scary when you read the book versus watch a movie. And I do think that that holds true. I gave this one 4 stars. I actually really enjoyed it. I will say there is a lot of strong language in this book because they are Irish, so just be prepared. This is very much so an adult book. It's like a horror based in Irish folklore. And so it kind of plays on this whole idea of like the fairies. I really enjoyed it. I definitely think the book was less scary than what the movie probably is. There's a lot of jump scare type stuff that I just isn't as scary in a book. It's hard to do a jump scare in a book, but I'm sure the movie is pretty freaky. I haven't tried to watch it. I feel okay with just reading the book. And then amongst all of these audiobooks that I've been reading or listening to, I was also slowly working my way through War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This one is a reread. I did a whole video of it and I annotated the whole thing. This is my first time really annotating a book. I just have never really done that, and it was honestly so fun. There are a lot of really fun quotes. I think Leo Tolstoy has such a good sense of humor. He's just so snarky. I definitely want to read other Tolstoy books, but This one I gave 4 stars. I will say it's not for everyone. I wouldn't recommend that everyone read this book, but I quite enjoyed it. I read it for the first time because of the musical that is based off of part of this book. It's called Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812 or something like that, and it is from just a tiny section of the book, but I love it. I know a lot of people are really intimidated by it, but I think if you are willing to get through kind of the historical part of it, there's actually some really funny lines in this book. And then one of my most anticipated releases of the year came out, and that was the 3rd book in the Children of Blood and Bone series, or the Legacy of Orisha series, whatever you want to call it. So I did go and reread the first 2 books in order to read the 3rd one. The first book is a really high one on my list. It's a 4.5. Even on a reread, it was still really good. The second book I love. It's a 5-star book for me. The 3rd book, unfortunately, was a huge letdown. This was one of my biggest disappointments of the year. It just goes off on this whole other thing. You're missing major characters. They just never show up. All of a sudden, all of these things are changing about her magic and what she can and can't do. And then you're following this weird villain that you've never seen before. And like everything that has been built up in the whole first two books just gets solved in like a couple pages. And you're just like, why? Like, what was going on with that? So I gave it 3.5 stars. It was like, it would have been fine if I didn't have the first 2 books. Like, it was almost like its whole own book. It shouldn't have been part of the series. I think from what I've read online, it seems like the author was kind of done with the series, and I don't know. It just didn't work for me. I'm super disappointed about it. I still loved the first 2 books, so I don't know if I'd recommend the series or not just because of the 3rd book, but I don't know. I don't know what to say on this one. Very sad about it. Okay, 2 more stacks. This is gonna be a long video. Murder Your Employer by Rupert Holmes. This one was fine. I gave it a 3.5. I don't know. I don't really have a ton of thoughts on this one. It was just fine. It was nothing crazy. You're following multiple different characters and point of views. Some of them I liked better than others. I don't know. I don't know that I'd strongly recommend this unless you had we're looking for a book very specifically like this. Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh. This one I picked based off of the cover. These last couple books were all books that I did in a video picking based off of the cover. I gave it 3 stars. It started out really good. It was very much so like a folklore. You're following this old man who's somehow tied to the forest, but then it became a romance. And honestly, this was just not a long enough book to deal with both the plot and the folklore and a romance. It just was too much in one book, and I just kind of lost me in the second half when it became romantic type of a book. So I don't know. It was fine. It's a super short book, so if you're interested, give it a try. Then I listened to Agent 355 by Marie Benedict. This one is also a short story that is a fictionalized book about Agent 355 who nobody knows who she is. It's from like the American Revolutionary War. She was a character. We have documents, lots of documents signed by Agent 355, but nobody knows who that is. And so this is her fictionalized version of what she thinks this character might be. I thought it was really good. I gave it 4 stars. I would be very interested to read a full-length book by this author because I do think that she wrote it in a I really love her writing style. I thought it was impressive how many emotions she was able to pack into such a short book and really make you feel attached to a character, even though it was like 3 hours. Then I picked up His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. This is the Temeraire series. I loved this one. I gave it 4.25. You're following the Napoleonic Wars, but with dragons, from the perspective of the British. The dragons talk. There's a super interesting way that they use the dragons. You'll put like a whole team of people on a dragon and they use them as these like big warships. It's really cool. The dragons are super funny. I love it, and I have continued the series, and I hope to read more of it this upcoming year. Then I picked up A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I thought this was really good. It's a YA mystery thriller book where she sets out to basically try and solve this cold case. Really good, really interesting. I don't have a ton of other thoughts on that. It's just a YA mystery. Then I listened to City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett. This one is a fantasy. It was a little bit hard to follow. I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was good. I have not continued the series yet, and I'm still undecided on if I'm going to or not. Very interesting, magic system, very interesting world. It was just hard to follow. There was one character that I really liked who's her like bodyguard guy. He was hilarious. Unfortunately, the second book seems to mostly follow a character that I just didn't really love, so I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to continue it yet. Okay, next book was Throne of Jade by Naomi Novik. This is the second book in the Temeraire series. I gave this one 4 stars. I think it was a great continuation. I didn't love how we kind of went away from a lot of the other characters. They take this, I don't know, how the plot goes is they end up separated from a lot of the other characters that you were following in book 1, and I got a little bit sad about that because I was really liking some of the side characters, so hopefully they join back up in the 3rd book. I'm crossing my fingers, but it was still good. There were still some interesting things that happened, but not exactly where I was hoping the plot would go. Then I read 5 Little Pigs by Agatha Christie. This one I gave 4 stars. It's another Poirot book. Not my favorite Poirot book. I gave it 4 stars. But it was still a good one. Then I finally managed to make my way through Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is book 1 in the Farseer trilogy. I know a lot of people really love this book, but it just didn't do it for me. I gave it 3.5 stars. It is so slow, is my biggest complaint about the first book. I did start the second book and ended up DNFing it because it just took this whole little like romance side plot, and again, once we get sidetracked from the actual plot by romance, I'm out. Like, that just will ruin a book for me, so I don't know. I don't plan on continuing the series unless someone can really convince me, but it just was too slow for me. And then I started a video of reading East African authors, and the first one that I read for that was Wizard of the Crow by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. This one is a magical realism book set in the Free Republic of Aboriria. And you're following this guy who's like kind of a sorcerer. I don't know. So confusing. I still don't know that magical realism is a thing that I super enjoy. I've read quite a few for my Around the World in Books challenge. And I just don't know that I love magical realism. So I think if you like that, this could be a really interesting book. It was good for being that, but it just really kind of slumped me out. It took me forever to read this book, so I gave it 2.75. I feel like it was one of those things where I felt like there was supposed to be some deeper meaning, but I just couldn't figure out what it was. And then I picked up this tiny little book called Deranged as I Am by Ali Zamir. I did not enjoy this book. I gave it 2 stars. This was just another dud for me. It started out really interesting and her writing was so good at the beginning, and then it just became weird. And he's like, this lady is like basically trying to force him to have an affair with her, and it just gets weird. So I don't know. Don't recommend this one. At that point, I was feeling a little bit slumped out, so I took a pause from that video and I picked up another Agatha Christie. This is the Big Four, another Hercule Poirot. This one is very much so like a international crime syndicate. So again, another one that's a little bit different from his typical one. I thought it was good. It was I gave it a 3.75. I definitely like the typical Poirot style better, where it's like a very closed door. There's only these suspects. I like that part of it. I kind of like the formula. And so, I don't know. It was fine. It wasn't my favorite. And then the last book for my East African authors video was The Last Brother, and this one saved the video for me. I gave it 4.5 stars. This is a World War II historical fiction book, but set in Mauritius, and it is by Natasha Opana. Very beautiful. You're following this little boy, and he basically just his life as he goes through. This island got hit by a ton of stuff. It's a bit of a heavier book, as lots of World War II books are, but he ends up befriending this boy that is in a prison camp there that is Jewish. And you're kind of following, he's now an old man and he's looking back on his life. Really good, really beautiful. If you're looking for a World War II book that's not set in Europe and seeing a different perspective on it, this one is really good. I'd recommend. And then I started into my spooky season reading. This is The Devil in Dark Water by Stuart Turton. I loved 7.5 Deaths so much that I decided to pick up another one. I love this cover. And this one very much so feels like Robin Hood and Little John on a boat with magic. Really good, interesting plot twist. Definitely a little bit crude stuff. There was a couple scenes I could have done without. There's one scene specifically where they're trying to just show how bad of a guy this one character is, and so it's using his marriage with this lady who's quite a bit younger than him, and basically you're watching her like go and do her duties to her husband or whatever, and it's like this weird kind of, not fully a sex scene, but like ish, and it was just uncomfortable and weird, and I get that we were trying to prove how bad of a guy this was, but I don't like when they make uncomfortable scenes in the book purely to show how bad a character was, especially when it's already well established. I don't think we needed that at all. So I gave that one 4 stars. And then I went back to another T. Kingfisher. This is A House with Good Bones. This one is a horror book, but it's like Southern Gothic. You have this girl who goes back home because she's in between jobs, so she goes to live with her mom, and weird things are happening. Her mom acts super weird. There's this like witchy character down the street who like rehabilitates vultures, and there's like this psycho old man who's like the neighborhood watch. There's just a lot of really funny characters. It's very humorous, and it's a sarcastic, dry humor that I just really appreciated. I gave this one 4 stars. I think it was good. There's definitely some strong language in it. Overall, it was just a great book if you want something that's horror but with some humor. Then I went back to my Books of Umber series. This is Dragon Games. It's book 2. I gave this one 4 stars. I think that this one's just a fun continuation. You're seeing a lot more about the abilities of the characters. It's just fun. I don't know. It's a middle grade fantasy book. You can't really go wrong. Just great when you need just a little pick-me-up. And then I also continued the Good Girls Guide to Murder series with Good Girl Bad Blood. This one I gave 4 stars. It was alright. I thought it was good. It wasn't as intriguing of a story to me. She starts a podcast. It's like a whole thing. I liked that you were seeing the fallout from the first book and you got to kind of continue that storyline, but I didn't love this mystery quite as much. And then as I was reading those books, I was working my way through The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Other Stories by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is a short story collection. I gave it 3 stars overall. Some of them were better than others. There were some that were really weird. There were some that were interesting. It's good if you want something for spooky season that you could just read a short story here and there. That's what I did, is I just read one in between each of my books. It was fine. Nothing crazy special, nothing that I'm gonna go rave about and tell you that you need to read, but it was good. And then I went and finished the Books of Umber series. This is The End of Time. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I think it ends on a good note. I think the books just get progressively better. Really fun way that they wrap it up. It is definitely one thing that I love about reading middle grade books, is that they're not stuck to the tropes that I feel like the YA has kind of gotten stuck in. And so the ending is very much so not what you would expect an ending to be in this series, but I thought it was really fun, really unique, creative way to end it. Just don't expect any of your standard storylines and tropes, which is partially what I love about middle grade. Alright, last stack. Continuing spooky reading, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I felt like it was about time that I finally read it. I gave this one 3.75. This is not what I thought this book was gonna be. I don't know, he creates his monster within the first like few chapters, and then you're just seeing all of the fallout. It was very much so one of those books that I think you were supposed to feel a little bit of pity for the monster, but I just did not. Yeah, I don't know. It was fine. It's a classic. I'm glad I read it. And then there were 4. This one surprised me. This is by Nancy Werlin. It's a YA mystery thriller. I gave it 3.5 stars. This one I didn't have super high expectations of. I got it randomly. I didn't know anything about it really. It's good if you want just a classic YA thriller. Nothing too crazy. Overall, it was fine. Not like my most favorite book ever, but it was good. Then I read Dracula by Bram Stoker, another one that I just felt like at some point I needed to read the book of. Dracula is such a thing in pop culture that at some point I needed to actually read it. I gave this one 3.75. I think it was good for the first half, and then we get to a point where we basically just repeat the whole thing, and it just got so irritating. Like, why can nobody learn from what happened at the beginning of the book? We were just making the same mistakes again. So that got irritating and kind of killed my enjoyment of it a little bit. It was looking like it was going to be much higher rated until we got about halfway through. Okay, Stay in the Light. This one got released in October. This is by A.M. Shine. It's the second book to The Watchers. I thought that this was just going to be a duology. It is not. There's definitely got to be another book. I don't know that there's been anything announced about a new book coming out, but surely there's gotta be another one. We ended at a point where everybody was in probably the most dire circumstances that they've been in the whole 2 books, and then it ends. So there's gotta be another book. I don't know if we're going for a trilogy or what, but you're seeing some of the fallout from book 1 and then how the characters are dealing with all of their trauma, but then you also have this whole other storyline that's going on that I can't really tell you what it is without spoiling things, but very fascinating. It dives even more into Irish folklore and starts to get into like names of specific gods and stuff. It made me feel like I need to do a bit more research on what their folklore is. It's very fascinating to me, but I clearly am uneducated about it. But gave it 4 stars. I thought it was a good continuation. I just am a little bummed out that I didn't realize there was going to be more books. Then I went and finished the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series with As Good as Dead. I gave this one 3.5 stars. This was my least favorite. I feel like it just went downhill for me. The first one was the best, and then they just got progressively worse. I didn't love where we went with this book. It felt super, I don't know. It just felt like everything was falling apart and we just kept making bad decisions. And those kinds of books just bug me. I didn't feel like it needed to get as extreme as it did. I didn't like the ending. It was another one of those endings where it just gives you a little bit of a hint of where it might have gone, but you don't actually get to see the happy ending. And I feel like when you go through so many extreme, terrible things with characters, I like to actually see the happy ending, and you don't get that with the series. So, I don't know. I didn't love it. I think I would have been happy just sticking with the first book, and I didn't really need to read the rest. Okay, and then I did my last Around the World in Books video for the year, and this was in Southeast Asia. The first book that I read for that video was The Happiness of Koti by Jane Vejajiva. And this one is a very short book about this girl whose mom has a terminal diagnosis of ALS, and you're kind of following like the last little bit of her mom's life and how that affects her and how she grieves and how she processes it as a child. I thought it was a really cute book. Very well done on how she depicted a child processing through grief. Obviously lots of trigger warnings depending on what kind of things trigger you, but I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was a very just well done, simple book. And then I picked up The Sorrow of War, and I struggled through this book. This is by Bao Ninh. It is a, I think, fictionalized book about North Vietnamese soldiers. And I gave it 2.75 stars. It was one of those books that just, what I thought it was going to be and what it was were very different, and it was just so heavy. And I thought it was going to be one of these books to be like, let's humanize the other side. But it very much so was like both sides are terrible, and I don't know. It dealt a lot with PTSD. Very little of this book was actually during the war. A lot of it was about the impacts that it had on North Vietnam afterwards and some of the soldiers and things like that. There are a lot of depictions of rape in this book that just really were more than I wanted to read, and it's just hard for me when it's a book that is based on real stuff. And these are real things that were definitely happening during the war, but it was just hard to read. So I don't know. I managed to get through it. I don't know that I'd recommend it because it was just a hard book to read. Then I read The Best I Could by Subhas Anandan. He is Singapore's most famous criminal lawyer, and this is one of his books that he wrote. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was fascinating. He walked through some of his life and how he got to becoming a lawyer, and then he walked through several of his big cases, and then just gave some general thoughts at the end, and it was very fascinating, very interesting. I would be very intrigued to read his other book that he actually voiced to someone while he was on dialysis before he died. So I don't know. Very interesting, very fascinating to see a different law system and how some of the trials went, and just overall a good book I'd recommend if you're looking to learn about someone. And then I listened to another book by T. Kingfisher. This is A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. It is very much so a middle grade book, but I adored it. I gave this one 5 stars. It was just so fun. There were some very quirky characters, and I think that is what she does best, is write just such unique, quirky characters. You're following this little girl who is a bread wizard, and she uses it to bake and stuff, but then she gets roped into this whole big conspiracy thing. It's just fun. I really loved the 2 main characters. I liked the ending, how she did it. It had some really cool lines. And I thought she hit some very deep topics in a way that kids could process well, so I think it'd be a great book to read with kids. Then I picked up The Fisherman King by Katrina Modaud. This was the last book for my Southeast Asian authors, and I gave this one 4 stars. I thought it was really well done. It's based off of Brunei folklore. If you are scared of snakes, do not read this book. She is a very good writer, and it was so easy to picture what was going on, but there are a lot of snakes in this book. So just a heads up. It's very much so feels like a folktale in that there's not exactly a happy ending. It's like things conclude, but it's not, it's more of a let's get around to proving this point and this moral of the story, not so much have a happy ending, but I thought it was good. I'm interested to read. I have one other of her books on my shelf, so I'll be reading that this year, but great writer. I'm not the person who visualizes books a ton, but I could see this one in my head so well. Loved it. Then I started read City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. This is book 1 in the Mortal Instruments. This is diving into a whole world. I gave it 4.5 stars. This book felt nostalgic. Like, it just felt like 2010s YA fantasy, and I loved it. I can see how some people might not love parts of it. It is so YA. It's relatively predictable. There were a few things that kind of came out of left field, but I'm definitely going to continue the series. I just thought it was great. And then after that, I continued the Shadow and Bone series, which I read Shadow and Bone in 2023, end of the year. So I finally got to these. I gave Siege and Storms, the second book, 4 stars. The last book I gave 4.5 stars. These were another one that were just a classic YA fantasy before the whole romantasy thing. Definitely follow some tropes. The ending actually kind of surprised me. There were some things that I was like, whoa, we really actually did that. I didn't think she would. So she did get me on a couple parts, but a lot of it was pretty predictable. Overall, I think it was a great series. I definitely would recommend. A lot of people skip this series to read Six of Crows, but I would recommend reading the trilogy first. I think it was really good. And then just quick mention, I won't go too deep into this one, but I did read the Book of Mormon through cover to cover twice this year, just for things at church and stuff. So thought I'd mention that. If I read my scriptures cover to cover, then I feel like I should count them as books. So that's going towards my 80. And then I read The Master and Margarita. This is definitely the year of Russian classic literature for me. This one I gave 3.5 stars. It was weird. Again, I just don't know how I feel about magical realism. I can't even begin to explain the plot to you. I think basically the short version is the devil comes to Moscow disguised as a professor of dark magic and just ruins a whole bunch of people's lives and causes chaos. It was interesting. It was weird. I don't know how I feel about it still. I'm processing. Not my favorite book, but interesting, entertaining. You just kind of have to set aside logic for a while. There's no plot, just vibes. That's about all I can say about it. And then the last book that I finished this year was actually an audiobook. I finished it on New Year's Eve, and this is Green Glass House by Kate Milford. This is very much so a middle grade book about this kid who lives in this house that is a smuggler's inn, basically. And all of these interesting people show up for Christmas and are staying in the house. They all get snowed in. Him and this other little girl are going about trying to solve who these people are, why they're here. There's some big mysteries going on and they're trying to solve them. It had quite the plot twist at the end. I was not expecting it. Honestly, the plot was really good for being a middle grade book. I thought it was very enjoyable even as an adult. I would recommend. I gave it 4 stars. And with that, we have reached the end of all 80 books that I read. Hopefully you found a recommendation in this video. My voice is clearly struggling, so I'm gonna go not talk for the rest of the day, but thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one very soon. Bye.